I was sitting right here, exactly where I am now, just a quiet Saturday morning in Willow Creek Estates, Georgia. The air was thick and sweet with pine and honeysuckle, sun barely clearing the tree line. I had my dog, Ranger, a big sleepy golden, curled up by my boots, and I was about to take that first perfect soul-calming sip of coffee. You know the one? The one that sets the whole weekend right. And that's when she came, barreling down the sidewalk like a salmon swimming upstream. Blazer, clipboard, sunglasses big enough to land a plane on, and that particular rigid, "I'm here to manage your existence" haircut. I hadn't even registered her face, but I knew what she was the second she set foot on my driveway. She stopped dead in her tracks, pointed a trembling manicured finger straight at me like a suburban wizard about to cast a curse, and screeched, "Sir, you need to vacate the porch. This is not your property and you are in violation." I blinked slowly. "You gotta understand. I'm wearing a weathered USMC hoodie. I'm on a porch I built myself with lumber receipts I could still dig up. And this absolute stranger is ordering me off my own house." I didn't laugh, though I wanted to. I just lowered the mug a quarter inch and said, "Morning to you too. And I can't sit." "Where exactly?" She huffed, clicking a cheap plastic pen like it was a loaded weapon. "The entryway. This is a common-use community access point. You are in violation of the Willow Creek Charter. Section 12B. No loitering in shared zones. Look." I knew right then she was either completely unhinged or fresh out of the University of Make It Up As You Go. I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle, because the last thing I wanted was for her to turn into a screeching police report. "Ma'am," I said, "I think there's a misunderstanding. I've owned this land for 7 years. I know my deed. There's no homeowners association here. This is my property." That didn't faze her. She brandished a sheet of paper at me, Comic Sans font, clip art of a gavel, the whole ridiculous, pathetic package, and puffed out her chest. "I am Prudence Whitaker," she declared. And yeah, of course her name was Prudence, the interim president of the transition board, and we are initiating compliance protocols. A sentence so fuel-efficiently ridiculous it could power a small car. I took the paper, glanced at the amateur hour absurdity, and handed it back, just refusing to engage with the fantasy. "Prudence, there is no HOA. And even if there were, you don't just invent one and start issuing fake fines on private property." That's when the volume went up. She stepped close, almost vibrating with misplaced authority. "You are non-compliant. I am issuing a verbal notice of removal. Vacate the deck immediately." Ranger, who usually sleeps through a thunderstorm, lifted his massive head, gave her one low, guttural growl that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting, and lay back down. Even my old dog knew we were dealing with peak suburban lunacy. I stood up slowly, not because she intimidated me. I've stood across from far worse things, but because I needed to make sure she didn't get any brilliant ideas about claiming I threatened her. "That's not going to happen," I said, firm now. "You are trespassing. If you don't step off my property in 10 seconds, I'm calling the county sheriff." She smirked. "That was a mistake." "Good. I'll do you one better." She pulled out her phone, put it on speaker, and barked, "Todd? Emergency. That male is refusing to leave the entry porch. Need compliance enforcement at lot 19. Now." Todd, who sounded like he was elbow deep in a rusty engine block, grunted, "On my way. Tell him we don't mess around." Prudence turned back to me, triumphant. "See? Certified compliance officer is en route. You are in big trouble." I looked at her, I looked at Ranger, and I looked at my lukewarm coffee. I knew this was only going to end one way, and it wasn't going to be with a polite apology. I calmly pulled out my phone, went to the group chat for my old unit, Echo Company, 1st Marines, and texted a single, perfect sentence. "Some nut is trying to evict me from my porch. Feel like dropping by?" The phone started buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets. 30 seconds. That's all it took. Messages flooded in. "Be there in 20, uniform or casual. Bring the colors, absolutely." These weren't just guys I'd served with. These were brothers. Federal agents, fire marshals, deputies, military lawyers. Men who knew exactly what the word authority meant. And they knew this pink-clad despot across the street didn't have a shred of it. While Prudence was busy snapping grainy photos of my flower pots, muttering about non-regulation colors. I took a slow sip of coffee and grinned. She had absolutely no idea what she had just started. About 15 minutes later, the first hammer dropped. Mac, that's Marcus Allen, a massive guy, broad as a barn, pulls up. He's still in his full county sheriff uniform after his morning shift. He gets out of the marked cruiser, walks up the driveway, and he owns the space, gives me a bear hug that nearly crushes my ribs, and then looks over at Prudence, who's gone the color of expired milk. "Everything all right, brother?" Mac asks, leaning against the railing. "Just dealing with the Willow Creek transition board," I reply, adding some dramatic air quotes. Mac raises an eyebrow at Prudence. "Ma'am, you got business here?" "I do," she says, her voice regaining some of its synthetic steel. "I am acting on behalf of the community charter. He is violating porch codes." Mac takes off his sunglasses, slow and deliberate. "That look right there. That's the difference between real authority and a clip art delusion." He looks her dead in the eye, and the whole street can practically hear him say it. "There is no HOA here. This street has never had one. And if you keep issuing fake compliance notices, Prudence, you are going to end up in real legal trouble with the county." She paled, but it was far from over. 2 more trucks rolled in, then a couple more personal vehicles. Before long, my quiet front yard looked like a pre-game tailgate for a serious unit reunion. Prudence was frozen, clutching that clipboard like it was the only thing holding her identity together. She had come to evict me from my porch, and now my entire brigade was about to show her exactly who she was messing with. We were men who understood boundaries, chain of command, and the proper use of force, and we were using none of it. Just sitting there, calmly, drinking coffee. That silence, that unified, quiet defiance, was a power she couldn't comprehend. Around noon, things got even more bizarre. Prudence had spent the morning plastering the neighborhood with flyers. A grainy, low-res picture of me on the porch with the caption, "Unauthorized occupation of community entryway." The photo looked like it was taken on a flip phone from 2004. I showed one to Mac. "She's trying to go full dictator with a printer and zero actual authority." Mac chuckled, shaking his head. Then Todd arrived, the infamous certified compliance officer. He pulls up in a beat-up sedan with a "for sale" sign still taped in the back window. He steps out wearing a reflective safety vest, khaki cargo shorts, and a ball cap that reads, "Security" in peeling vinyl letters. He swaggered toward the porch with the exaggerated confidence of a man who'd just been handed a laminated fake badge. "Sir," he began, adjusting his cheap sunglasses, "you've been officially flagged for non-compliance with the Homeowners Association's Civic Guidelines, Section 3.2a, regarding deck occupation and visual uniformity." I blinked. "Did you just say visual uniformity?" He nodded, deadly serious. "Yes, sir. This porch does not comply with community harmony aesthetics." Mac let out a wheezing laugh and nearly dropped his mug. He walked slowly toward Todd. "Let me get this straight," Mac said, his voice deadly calm. "You just insulted a Marine's porch design. Now let me see some ID, Todd." Todd hesitated, then pulled a laminated card from his vest. It was a gym membership with his name scribbled in Sharpie on the back. Mac stared at it, looked back at me, and just raised his eyebrows. I stepped forward. "Look, Todd, I'm not leaving. And unless you're about to issue me a violation from the Department of Make-Believe, I suggest you take your clipboard and head back to that lemon of a car before I call the real authorities again." Todd looked frantically at Prudence, who was across the street filming on her phone, mumbled something about documenting the incident, and then scrambled back to his stall-prone sedan. But Prudence was relentless. A little while later, she called the actual county police again. Not just Mac, but 2 fresh cruisers with lights flashing. She ran to them, waving her phone, yelling that unauthorized males in military attire were unlawfully occupying public space. I stepped off the porch, shook hands with the first officer, and calmly explained the situation. Mac handed over his sheriff's ID. Then, in the most perfect scripted moment of the entire week, the second officer tilted his head, smiled wide, and said, "Sergeant Cole, is that you?" It was Ben. Corporal Ben Carter, another brother from my unit. We hadn't seen each other since the last deployment, But the instant I heard his voice, the years melted away. We shook hands, then hugged like brothers do. The officers huddled, speaking quietly, then walked over to Prudence. I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I saw the color drain from her face as they laid out the reality. She was harassing a property owner, and one of her key witnesses was literally standing right there in the county uniform. Her mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. She didn't retreat, though. No. She stormed away, muttering darkly about going above local jurisdiction. That night, something Ben said stuck with me, and I started digging. Property records, zoning maps, county council minutes, and I found the smoking gun. The Willow Creek Charter Prudence was referencing. It didn't exist legally. There was an application to start a new HOA filed 2 months ago, listing Prudence as the acting president, but it had been flat-out rejected by the county planning board. That explained the desperation. She wasn't part of a real HOA. She was trying to invent one by brute force to enforce her personal, rigid rules on a community that didn't want her. Even more damning, the records showed she didn't even own the house. She was a tenant, and a problematic one at that, with noise complaints and a civil suit for unpermitted community beautification. I realized this wasn't about the porch, or colors, or loitering. This was purely about control. Prudence wanted power, and the only way she thought she could get it was by manufacturing a false kingdom. And now she dragged a squad of combat Marines into her fantasy. The next morning, the confrontation escalated physically. I woke up to the sound of hammering. Prudence was nailing little wooden posts into the ground near the sidewalk, right on the edge of my property line, tying them together with bright red tape. She had posted a laminated flyer on the middle one, dressed in a ridiculous bright purple visor and a t-shirt that read, "President Founding HOA Committee." As I approached, coffee in hand, she held up a hand like a traffic cop. "This is a restricted zone now," she announced. "You are not allowed to interfere with official HOA boundary marking." I stared at her, then at the sad, pathetic little triangle of tape that looked like a kindergarten science fair project. "Prudence," I said, "you do realize you are building imaginary borders on property that doesn't belong to you?" "As acting president of the pending HOA," she smirked, "I have the authority to make preliminary designations. This area will soon be integrated." "You can't integrate what you don't own," I countered. But she just waved me off and marched back to her castle of delusion. That was the final defining line. I messaged the group chat again. "Operation Porch Shield is a go, assemble." Within the hour, 3 more unit members rolled up. One guy, who's now a federal investigator, brought donuts, because nothing says tactical superiority like a box of glazed. Another, a cybersecurity specialist, showed up with a drone camera and a tripod. Our former squad medic, now an MP, showed up in uniform, set up a folding chair next to me on the porch, and sat down like we were at a Sunday tailgate. Prudence reemerged, genuinely stunned to see 4 men in varying degrees of uniform, drinking coffee and looking utterly unfazed. The drone lifted off and began quietly buzzing over the neighborhood, capturing aerial footage of her stakes and her ridiculous conflict zone. "You can't gather like this without HOA clearance," she shouted, face crimson. "You're making the neighbors feel unsafe." The federal investigator, Mike, stood up slowly. He pulled out a prepared folder. "Prudence, you have been issuing fraudulent notices, trespassing, impersonating an authority figure, and attempting to enforce laws that don't exist. You want unsafe? Let me show you what a real federal violation looks like." She stumbled backward, rattled. "This isn't over. You'll be hearing from my legal advisor. Tell him to stop by," the MP said, leaning back. "We'll be here all day." They retreated, but not for long. Prudence returned later with Todd and another accomplice, attempting to film an official recording. I walked to the edge of the property line, held up my phone, and started filming them. "Do you really want to go on camera again, Todd? Because last time didn't end well for you." Mike stood beside me and calmly pulled out a printed cease and desist letter, pre-drafted based on all her previous shenanigans. "By recording and threatening enforcement action under a non-existent authority," Mike stated, "you are violating state impersonation laws and entering harassment territory. This letter outlines the legal consequences. Leave now." Todd looked at Prudence, who had stayed a few feet back, and muttered, You said this was legit. Both he and his friend turned around, mumbled apologies, and vanished, leaving Prudence alone, flustered, yelling at no one. The final, perfect act of poetic justice came moments later. As Prudence turned to head home, she realized her car, which she had parked half on my lawn and half in front of a clearly marked fire hydrant, was being hooked up by a real city tow truck. A neighbor, a retired fire marshal, had called it in. We watched, silent, as the tow truck driver shrugged at her frantic protests, hoisted the car into the air, and rolled slowly down the street. She screamed after it, "This is harassment! This is illegal!" But the tow truck driver didn't even break stride. She stood there, alone, screaming after her disappearing car, the false queen who had just lost the last piece of her imaginary empire. But even that didn't stop her. The next morning, I found a legal notice in my mailbox. Prudence was suing me in small claims court for emotional distress, disruption of community peace, and what she called unauthorized military presence meant to incite fear. The best part? She was asking for $15,000 in damages and mandatory porch relocation. Seriously, mandatory porch relocation. Like my deck could be airlifted to a more compliant household. I forwarded the letter to our unit's former JAG lawyer, Vic, who called me back within the hour, already chuckling. She wrote this herself. There is zero legal standing. Her entire claim is based on a fantasy that doesn't exist. Still, Vic insisted we respond officially to make it airtight. He drafted a counterclaim, backed with copies of my deed, sworn statements from Mac and Ben, and the drone footage of her planting her ridiculous tape boundaries. The icing on the cake was a screenshot from a neighborhood social media group, where Prudence admitted the HOA was still in the early planning stages. We sent everything over. 3 days later, the court rejected her complaint. No hearing, no appeal. The judge's note was clear. No evidence of a legal homeowners association or actionable violation of rights. Respondent owns the property in question. I expected her to quit then. But she came back louder, trying to rally 3 households of recent transplants. They stood on the sidewalk with handmade signs that read things like, "End porch occupation," and "Protect our HOA vision." It looked less like a protest and more like an awkward, miserable picnic. Their little demonstration fell apart fast. A real HOA board from a nearby subdivision issued Prudence a cease and desist because she had been using their logo and claiming they were in talks to merge. The legal weight of that real authority was enough. The 3 supporting families quietly apologized and backed away. Prudence was losing control of the narrative, and fast. To celebrate, the guys and I took a trip to the local hardware store and picked up the sturdiest steel flagpole we could find. We installed it right in the center of the yard, surrounded by fresh mulch. When it was done, we raised 2 flags, the Stars and Stripes, and right beneath it, the Marine Corps flag. Neighbors gathered around, clapping, smiling. An older gentleman who'd served in Vietnam wiped his eyes and said, "That's the best thing I've seen on this street in 20 years. Prudence watched from across the street, arms folded, clipboard clutched. But for the first time, she was silent. A few days later, I got the news from her landlord. He'd seen the whole mess online and realized his tenant was exposing his property to legal risk. He gave her formal notice of lease termination. The last time I saw Prudence, she was loading boxes into a moving truck. She didn't look angry anymore, just tired, worn out from fighting a battle that never had a chance. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I just sat on my porch, Ranger at my feet, coffee in hand, watching the world return to peace. By sunset, the truck was gone. The house across the street was quiet, and the only sound was the soft rustle of flags in the breeze. The false queen had finally abdicated, and all it took was truth, unity, and a porch full of Marines who weren't about to let a bully win. The neighborhood changed after that. It got quieter, but it also got stronger. People who used to keep to themselves started waving, stopping to chat. My porch, which I just built for morning coffee, became the unofficial gathering spot. The neighbors started calling it something that makes me smile every time I hear it. The outpost. "Hey, meet me at the outpost tonight. Bring a cooler to the outpost." We reminded each other what community really means. Doesn't take an army to stop a bully, just a handful of people who refuse to be pushed. So, I'm sitting here now, Coffee's perfect, Rangers snoring, and the flags are flying. It's quiet, it's strong, it's home. But what I want to know from you is this. If you had been in my place watching your car get towed away by real authority while you were trying to pretend you had fake authority, would you have ever learned the lesson? Was prudence punished enough? Or should a fake HOA president face tougher legal consequences? Let me know in the comments below and tell me, what's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever had to fight? Like and subscribe if you think a clipboard will never beat a USMC hoodie, and I'll see you in the next one.